Another aspect of women's work, and to a certain extent men's work in the colonial period, is the making of fabric. And for the Champlain Valley, the two primary sources of fiber for making fabric was flax made into linen and wool from sheep. Now, initially, the sheep that were primarily brought to the Champlain Valley for wool were a kind of domestic animal that wasn't really raised as much for its fleece as it was for its for the mutton that it produced, another important source of meat for colonial Europeans. But very frugal colonial people made the best use of it as they could. Wool would be sheared from the sheep, usually in late spring. Sometimes the sheep would be driven into a stream and washed as they walked through the stream. And the wool would be separated from the body with a series of shears. Good shearers could shear a sheep probably in the matter of about 5 to 10 minutes apiece. So it could happen very quickly. Often people would gather their sheep together and shear their wool all at once. And then the wool would be laid out in the sun to dry if they swam their sheep, so to speak. And then depending on exactly when the shearing took place, the wool might be just folded up and put into a dry attic to wait for processing, or if there was time before spring planting, some of the processing would take place. Now, the raw wool would be picked clean, usually by hand. That was a kid's job, and the picking literally was just to pick the fibers out of the wool. And then, in preparation for spinning, wool would then be applied to wool cards like these. The wool cards would be used to draw the various fibers into alignment and create a series of what spinners call rologs that would be then spun into yarn. The roughest part of the wool might be spun into yarn that could be knitted into hand mitts or stockings. The finer yarn might be used to weave into cloth, and could be very useful in a variety of other items, even things like taking care of the sick. Woolens were often soaked and then used in various ways to apply plasters. And wool, of course, was woven wool was very important outer clothing, especially in the wintertime. Now, linen is a fabric that is more the fabric that would have been used to wear close to the skin. It tended to be softer, at least once it was fulled, and was a kind of fabric that could be used not just for clothing, but for a variety of other things in the household. Sheeting, for instance, pillow beers, toweling, and diapers, for instance. The process of making linen is a lot more complex than the process of making woolen cloth. Linen comes from growing flax. Flax had to be planted very closely so that it grew up very close together, very tall and straight with no branches on it. After it flowered, it would be pulled and stooked in the field. The stooks would be allowed to dry. And then, depending on the timing of work and the availability of labor, it might be put away in a barn, or it might then begin the part of the process to actually extract the fibers inside the core of the flax plant that then become part of the basic material that then is made into linen thread. That linen, so the process to extract those things, those bits of fiber, start with retting, which is a process that rots the outer core of the flax plant itself, and then another drying process, and the use of a flax break, which literally breaks the outer core of the linen, the flax material itself. And so you would use both a flax knife and a flax break to break open the retted flax. Then, once the process of breaking the flax itself has been accomplished, what you have is a series of combs that you would literally move the flax through, which removed the debris and made the flax progressively finer and prepared it for spinning. And so you have scutched flax, which is coming from your break and your scutching knife. You have the flax being processed through the combs, eventually producing a very fine collection of flax fibers, which then can be spun into thread. Here's some very fine linen thread. And then it's woven. Linen is almost always woven rather than knitted or made into fabric in any other way. And then the last thing I would say about both the weaving of wool and the weaving of linen is a very frugal housewife would use the width of the warp and weft of her fabric to its greatest advantage. So, for instance, shirts and women's inner gowns would be cut in long rectangular fashion to make the greatest use of the fabric. So there's almost no waste when making the shirts and making the dresses, and ultimately then without waste, you're not going to spend a lot of time spinning or weaving something that isn't going to, in the end, become very useful to the family.